there. My name is Kara Joseph. I am a sommelier and author. I've been working in wine and writing for 5 years. It's a very exciting, unconventional lifestyle, which I do enjoy. So say you've never met a sommelier, you've never heard the word, but you're approaching one, right? So what a sommelier is in its purest form, it's a person who is well versed in wine, whether it be the explanation of wine to the regions and all of the behind the scenes growing of the vines, whether it be the service and presentation of wine. So that means proper service so that anyone that they're presenting wine to will have the best possible experience. And then the third option, so you've got the kind of explanation behind the scenes of wine, the actual in front of you presentation of wine. Then the third one is really going to be the kind of overall mastery of the subject, where you can fluidly and elegantly connect those two things, so you connect all that cognitive with the sensory. And to me, that is the perfect sommelier. At the current moment of my career, in the current phase, I am self-employed. I'm working for myself, but mainly focusing on sharing my book and wine education with folks across the country, really. This is what's really exciting and dynamic about the wine industry. You can work in a lot of different facets. So I'll just give a quick example of how I've worked for other organizations, entities in the wine industry to help give a better idea of scope of how you can work with wine. So my first position was with a winery. So that's another organization you can work with, and that will help you to have a really firm exposure to wine and people. Then I've been able to work for a restaurant. So that's another way. I worked in a restaurant as a sommelier. And then you can actually work on more of the business side and more of the sales side. So at that point in my career, I worked with what's called a distributor. So there's really three main ways to work with someone or a bigger organization with wine: wineries, restaurants, and distribution channels. So that's the real way to think of it in terms of how to work with others. Absolutely. So a day in the life of, I love that. I love that question. And so a real insight into working in this kind of industry, basically, obviously you get up a little bit earlier, because if you are working for yourself, you don't necessarily have that 9 to 5 structure. So you try to get in as much as possible. I really start the day kind of email, catching up, framing, what's the day going to look like? And a lot of it is just planning out what's the best way to try to get exposure for my book, but also I'm constantly studying and trying to grow with wine as well. So this current part of life is equal parts reaching out to the right people with my book, but then spending a lot of time trying to keep my studies up. And that all ties together because what I do the rest of the day kind of comes into the form of events and book promotion. So I'm kind of taking everything I do in the morning hours, and then I take it to its, full expression into the afternoon and evening. So a little more clear example. So a good example of that would be, all right, I have, let's say, a bookstore in Chicago, Illinois, that I really want to sell my book, and I want to do events with them. So I would spend the beginning of the day reaching out to them, connecting, trying to get them to pay attention to me. And then in an ideal world, they would buy and stock my book. And then I would get to go to Chicago and have maybe partner with a restaurant, partner with a wine shop and that bookstore, and get to do a wine education event and then have them purchase the book through the bookstore. So a lot of chains of connection and using those kinds of relationships to hit a bunch of goals. And then I have a glass of wine at the end of the day. So I think that's a very important question, because as romantic and as adventurous as a life this is, it has to have some bearing in reality. There has to be this reality check. How do you get here and things of that nature. My background has absolutely nothing to do with wine in terms of my college education. I went to the University of Florida with a emphasis on communications and marketing. So what actually happened, of course, I think formal education is very important. I think in whatever you choose, it lays the groundwork and the foundation. Toward the end of college, I took a very different mindset. I decided, and I think this is an important question for any human to ask themselves, I decided I do not want a normal 9-to-5 job. I just don't think that's well suited for what I want. And I believe that's where you really create a jumping off place to go into the world and not be afraid to take certain paths. If you decide then and there toward the end of college, what kind of lifestyle you want. So I started with, all right, this is the lifestyle I want. I have my, base of education. Now what? And as you'll read in the book, and as I'll briefly explain, long story short, I decided I have one life. I want to move across the country. I want to go to Napa Valley because I was interested in wine and I just want to see what can I make happen out there. And as you can imagine, a recent college grad from Florida, I was not being, let's say, recruited heavily to go out and work at a winery. But one other tip is persistence, resiliency. I probably emailed about 80 different wineries. I got 3 responses. So that happens sometimes too. But then I was able to get a very entry-level position at a winery. So I was pouring wines by the glass, and I opened myself up to what could this turn into? And I let my passion really direct the ship. And it ended up being, I love being with people. I love working with wine. I love learning about this subject matter. So then once I had that, this was about 3 months after into the real world, I was then able to, as an adult, as someone that wasn't as influenced by what society necessarily wanted, what my parents necessarily wanted, what was expected of you, I was able to kind of make that decision. I want to work with wine. Let me figure out how. And then I got into what's called the Court of Master Sommeliers, which is the formal education body for working with wine. And then I did another formal education certifying body called the Wine and Spirit Education Trust, so WSET. So I took those 2, kind of like the equivalent of college of wine, and began formally creating the life that I wanted with wine. It really isn't. I mean, if you are a high school student and you are a awesome rare unicorn and you say, I want to go work in wine, you could easily go ahead and just jump feet first into the different organizations that I mentioned earlier. Yeah. I think we're finding more and more that it's not the end all be all college education, but it is interesting when I look back and I think, I didn't even really have to go to college. Then I look at certain parts of my life and certain parts of my work with wine and these kind of entrepreneurial directions I'm going. And then I realize, oh man, what I learned in college helped here, or this general subject matter that I learned helped here. I think it doesn't seem very obvious at times, but the information, the education we garner in college does come out in unique ways. So that would be kind of my what I would say. You don't realize it, but it will come back and help you, even if you're following a different passion in life. And then do you mind if I add one more part that really, I mean, maybe doesn't differentiate or distinguish this profession, but that is so vital, is mentorship, and having someone that's been through it and has certifications and has knowledge to really help guide you. That I would say is almost more invaluable to working in wine than it's right up here with even the certifications in this line of work, I would say. It all began with my parents. So when I was a junior, my parents had gone out to Napa. First time, I didn't know anything about wine. I didn't know anything about California, but this was a pretty formidable time in my life. A junior in college, the whole world was in front of me. I didn't really know what I wanted to do yet. I knew I loved kind of learning and seeing new things and experiencing new just parts of life that I didn't know about yet. So they came back to Florida, and I'll just never forget, we would sit around our dining room table and they would tell me the stories about the wineries they visited. And they would pour me a little bit of, Chardonnay from Napa, and they would teach me how to taste it. And it just became something completely foreign to me that just lit my soul. It just lit me up because I got to connect with my parents and hear their stories. And then I had something tangible in front of me that they experienced, they could bring to me. And then I felt like I was learning how to do this mysterious, very elegant art of tasting wine. Of course, I wasn't, I didn't know much at all, but I never forgot that feeling. And I really couldn't even explain it. But what happened is I was able to take that experience to college. So I would go back to University of Florida and I would be the wine girl, right? I would have dinner parties and I would have wine and cheese nights. And I could take that same experience just using a little wine and then share that with my friends. And I just always remembered seeing people's eyes just light up. I don't know if it was the way I talked about it or just because it was wine. I didn't care. But I'd always wished that I could find something in life that would make people's eyes light up or create some kind of impact. I didn't know what kind of impact it would be or what the vehicle would be, but it ended up, I just couldn't shake the thought that wine could be that for me. And that was what really spurred taking the chance to go out to Napa and letting it really have more effect in my life and seeing what it could be instead of just saying, oh, this is a foolish dream. This is just something I shouldn't, this makes no sense. Instead, I said, you know what? It might make no sense, but something about it feels undoubtedly correct and right. The interesting part about working in wine in this specific type of work I'm doing right now in my current career, it could be either or. You could decide, all right, I want to do a lot of the behind the scenes. I want to connect with people on social media. I want to do more writing. I want to take myself away from this public exposure. Or you could say, I want to do as many events as possible. I want to be in front of people. I want to go to people's homes. I want to share wine and I want to connect with people as much as possible. I tend to gravitate toward trying to have as much collaboration and as much contact with people as possible. So you can really choose how solitary or how open and more collaborative you want to be. But then, and that's just also kind of on the side of how you interact. But in terms of work, in terms of, I guess you could think of it, do I have a team of people I work with, or is it really just me? It is more just me in terms of doing the day-to-day tasks of being a sommelier and of being an author. It's really more internal and on me in that sense. Sometimes you can be seduced into, maybe I do just want to go back and work for someone else and just have that level of security and stability. But I believe you can really have both in your life. I think you can really create a certain lifestyle where you have these outlets of self-expression and of allowing yourself to create your own destiny. But then when you need that bit of support, you can always kind of lean back on some more formal job or position as well, which is probably what the flow of my career will most likely turn into as I move forward. Actually takes me back to my very, very, very first job, which has obviously nothing to do with what I'm doing now, but I learned an extremely important lesson. So I was a checker at Publix. I was a cashier. So I would, do the checking of the items. And I learned that you could have an impact on every single person that went through your line. You could either choose to not try to form a connection, not try to have a genuine connection with people in front of you, or, and just do their groceries and keep it very surface level, or really try to have even if it's a quick relationship or connection with the person in front of you. And work was more enjoyable. I felt like people had a more enjoyable experience when you just gave that little bit extra of true and genuine concern, thought, attention to the person in front of you. And that lesson just kept being reinforced and reinforced and reinforced in every single aspect of life. I just truly believe that the more you try to, and of course there's always exceptions, but 9 times out of 10, anything you do is relationship based. It's how you relate to the person in front of you, and it's how much you decide to dedicate to trying to create a solid interaction with your fellow man. I think that's the biggest lesson I learned in that very simple and just kind of beginning job. That was the biggest thing I learned. I have had the chance to meet a lot of different people, whether it be folks that have become sommeliers or have continued to move up the ladder with wine, or people just getting started. And the real important trait is you have to, I know this is very cliche, but you have to love it. You have to love the idea of learning and of learning. And here's another thing with wine, this is a completely foreign realm or area of expertise for a lot of people. And with wine as well, a lot of people think they know more than they do. I know I did. So when you actually get into studying and working with wine, there's going to be a lot of different points for intimidation, for failure, very quick and very frequent failure, and for losing the steam and losing that belief that you can keep getting better. So you really have to have that love of the process with wine, because it will take time and time and time again before you understand a glass of wine fully. You'll have to fail a lot, not really understanding a glass of wine, not connecting all the dots of, these grapes were grown in this area with these conditions by this person, made in this way. And that's why I have what I have in my glass, because it looks this way and smells this way and tastes this way. You have to connect so many different dots to get to a glass of wine. And then you actually have to understand it on your palate and in your nose and all the different pieces that go together. And you will be many times in a lot of different rooms when you are growing with wine, the least knowledgeable person. And you will be the one where you're asked a question. Someone will ask, oh, well, what do you smell? What do you feel? What's this wine saying to you? And you'll get it dead wrong. I know, because I did it many times, but it's going back again and going back to a tasting group and going back to a study session and taking the test again if you don't pass. I would say the one trait you need to have is just the resiliency, and always you have to love it, because there will also be points when you think, maybe I'm not meant for this, but it will keep getting better if you stick with it. I promise. Yeah, and it's something that a lot of people don't really think about. A corkscrew or a wine opener is, that's step one, I guess you could say. So you're gonna need to have one of those as a sommelier. But I, for the life of me, did not know how to use it at all. So that's one piece of equipment you're gonna want to have and gonna want to learn how to use to open wine. And I would say, other than that, just the background knowledge is obviously a tool for work in wine. But if you want a tangible object, a corkscrew is a good one to have. It actually does. Especially for continuing to keep growing with certifications and the study of wine, which is an invaluable part of working in wine, you're really going to want to do that traveling. You're really going to want to touch the vineyards in Willamette Valley. You're going to want to go to the Champagne region of France and taste the wines from the source. And the beautiful part about wine is there are a lot of opportunities to go travel, go to Napa Valley with your different, organizations, certification bodies. Also, a lot of the employers of folks that work in wine, there will be opportunities for travel as well, but it's pretty invaluable. I doubt that one would get too far without getting to the spots of vineyards and different wineries around the world. So finances, what you make, that's always going to color your lifestyle, your world. But I do have to say, working in wine, there is going to be, earlier I spoke about the three different facets, right? The three different types of work you can do in wine that I think are the most applicable: winery, restaurant, distribution, and sales. And I would say if you were to choose any of those, you would probably be dancing between, say, 40 and 75,000, just in depending on your rank, depending on your position. I would say that's a sweet spot for what you could make in this industry, 40 to 75. And a lot of people are thinking, oh, bye, that's not that much. Or they're thinking, oh, that's awesome. So that also depends on what kind of money you'd like to make. But I find that to be a secondary part of importance to me, because I have enough to live, survive, feed, clothe, live that's fine. That was always what I wanted. But what working in wine gives you that I find is so much more elusive in other industries is you have more opportunities there's just more functions. There's more gatherings. I know now that we're especially out of COVID times, it's becoming more and more popular, but I just find you get to try more interesting cuisines. You get to try more interesting wines. You're getting exposed to so many different cultures. It's just because wine is such this worldly subject, and whatever path you choose, whether it be restaurants, wineries. I wrote a book about it, for God's sake. I mean, there's just so much you can get out of working in wine if you open yourself up to it. So I would say the lifestyle is unique and is very colorful. And people that work in wine, they're just I find they're exciting, they're fun, they have this vivacious attraction to life. And in hospitality, we're in hospitality too. So we have to kind of try to always keep ourselves up and keep ourselves, the spirit up as well. So I would say that's the most important thing, is that maybe you're not making 6 digits, but what you're not making, I find, is definitely made up for in the opportunities for life, just for adventure and excitement. I did mention a lot of the partying, a lot of the excitement. I'm sure a lot of people look at a life of wine and say, all she does is drink wine all day and have these fun times, not really, doing anything substantial, right? Or life changing. I would say that's a stigma within the wine industry, is that we're all just a bunch of folks having wine all day and not really doing anything impactful. But I think that in some cases there is that danger. I mean, I think in any industry as well, there is a danger of overindulgence, or where people do kind of go a little bit too far into that side of things. But I would say to speak to that, there's so much more that goes on before you kind of get to that event or that glass of wine or that enjoyment. There's so much more hard work and study and the grind part of working in wine that then you can enjoy a little bit after that. So that's the stigma that one always deals with. I think everyone in every industry, people probably think, oh, they don't work as hard as me, or da 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 da. But I think we're all working pretty hard. I'd say my favorite thing is just the the hopefulness in getting to work with wine. I find it to be a very hopeful career, because I believe there's so much more ahead of me with wine. I can always learn more. I can always find people to impact. I always feel like there's something I can do, whether it be a formal job, writing another book. I feel like there's so much hope. And I would encourage people to find a passion, a career, whatever that has that, because I think something that a lot of people lose in their work lives, their real lives, whatever, I think we lose hope for growth or for passion in what we do. So I love that the most in working with wine. I think there are negative aspects, because of the things I mentioned on the positive side of things. There's always the counter to that. There's always the potential negative to every positive. That's just balance. So I would say the overindulgence. There is that threat that you have so much wine in front of you, you have the opportunities for all these parties, for all this wine. There is a threat of going too far into that. That could definitely be a negative. And I think everyone in this industry has gone through a period where they kind of had to, myself included, I had to look at myself and say, this could be dangerous if you don't get control. So that could easily be a negative that is also a positive. So you have to worry about that. I would say along the same lines of, you know, maybe not making as much as other professions, that could be a negative if you are looking at your success in terms of monetary. You could think, oh, well, I mean, I'm not even really making it. So that could also be a negative. But I would encourage anyone in that state of mind to really reevaluate what they think of as success, because that's something that I also had to do, where I thought, oh, well, maybe, I mean, I've been in this industry for X amount of years, I should be making this much. But then you kind of have to realize that the success is not necessarily directly tied to that. And then another negative could be, maybe you don't want to do all the studying. Maybe you don't want to hit the books. Maybe you're not wanting to, you graduate college and then have to go through different iterations of college like studies for wine. So as much as I love that, it could be a negative. So sometimes I don't want to keep, taking test after test and having to fail and then retake or things like that. So that has been a negative in the past as well. But once again, it's just changing that perspective. So what would I have wanted to know before making the decision? I want to be a sommelier. I'm going to take these tests. I'm going to get this degree and then off to the races. I would have wanted to know how in this industry, it's very common to have a lot of different quote unquote jobs. So I was under the mindset that, at least growing up, I think you as well, maybe a lot of people think you're making it if you've got one job for 25 years, you're making the stable income, you're staying in one place, that's success. So you, in the wine industry, I believe you do go through moments of, oh man, I just changed jobs 3 times in X amount of time, is what's happening. But then you realize looking back that each of those jobs was a stepping stone, and it's not necessarily the most important thing to have to stay with one job for your entire career in wine. So I would have enjoyed someone telling me that and saying, you know what, it can be like this, but it's very normal, and not to worry that that's something that could and will happen as you grow with wine and find your own slice of the industry, whatever that may look like. That's where I guess it could be considered not good and bad, but I would say with wine, and because it does have this dual meaning in my life. Yes, it provides me income, it provides me different ways to work and make a living, but I truly do spend a lot of my free time in that same realm or with the same kinds of people in the industry and studying about wine or reading about wine. So I, my downtime and my career tend to intersect. But on that same note, I do believe there are important times where you need to just disconnect completely. So I do a lot of running. So I try to kind of carve out time and activities not tied to wine or what I do. So that's important too, I would say. But that's kind of what makes it exciting and enjoyable for me, is that, and I know this one is cliche, but it never really does feel like work. It really doesn't. And that's the most cliche answer, but it is very true. I would say really the wine industry provides a lot of interesting ways to work on the peripheral without completely dedicating your life to wine. So I would say there's so many part-time job opportunities with wine. You can get a part-time position at a wine shop and just kind of be around wine and be around that world. I would say just dipping a toe in, or even asking. A lot of restaurants with sommeliers will be very open to having you maybe shadow a sommelier, or like I mentioned, this is a very mentor driven profession and career where people want to share what they know about wine and what they have to kind of give other people surrounding wine. So I would say that's a great way, is just start slowly dipping your toe into different parts of wine. Having a sommelier certification is not the end all be all to work with wine. Actually, a lot of people do not believe it's necessary at all, because it's just a formal recognition of your studies and your knowledge of wine, there's a lot of very successful, knowledgeable wine professionals that haven't wanted to spend the money, haven't wanted to dedicate their time and energy to some certifying body. So I would say pretty much everything a person that has achieved the title of sommelier can do, you can do without getting that certification. But you can't forget, you still have to know your stuff. You still have to know about wine. You still have to dedicate time and energy to growing with it. But I do not believe it is necessary. And it's been proven in different aspects of the industry. So you could very easily get into the business side without the certification, because restaurants will typically prefer the certification. So the business side is great for folks that have a mind that's more geared toward, that you want to learn about wine, you want to know about wine, you want to share that, but you have an emphasis on business interactions and more of a formal, quote unquote, role with wine rather than a winery or a restaurant where a lot of it is geared to that knowledge and to the presentation, the service, the descriptions of wine. I would tell them what my dad told me as I was kind of in these years where, okay, it's time to choose that profession, choose that career. He said, I don't care if you are a rocket scientist. I don't care if you are a garbage person. I want you to be the best, either rocket scientist or the best garbage person that there has ever been. So it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you do. It's how you do it. And I believe that everyone's capable of doing their passion, of living their passion very well. And that's what I would say is find it and do it very well.